Ah, yes. Okay. Right at that moment, the projector turns off. Some days you eat the bear, some days the bear eats you. Turn in your Bibles to John 12. I'm saying that knowing full well that we're going to be all over the Gospels tonight, telling the story of a family. And it's just absolutely one of the best stories in the New Testament. Well, let's see. Okay. Would the person who prayed for the computer pray for the projector? Oh, come on. I came down 40 minutes early to get this all squared away. So you see how well I did. That looks like something. All right. So here we are. We're on the Saturday before Jesus dies. March 28th, 33 AD is my very educated guess. Here is Google satellite view of Jerusalem at the time of Christ. I'll give you the plans for the time travel machine. You see Bethany, we're kind of looking northwest here. It's kind of a northwesterly view. Bethany down in the right-hand corner. And there's a road. It goes up across the Mount of Olives, past the tiny village of Bethphage, and on into Jerusalem, right at the Temple Mount. Goes right across the Kidron Valley, where the Garden of Gethsemane lies. And so we're going to begin Passion Week as Jesus arrives in Bethany. As you remember from 2 weeks ago, you have anointed my head with oil, Psalm 23:5. We're about to look at the fulfillment prophecy from David's psalm. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead for 4 days. John 11:39. And we're going to study Jesus by Mary, Martha's sister, and how it prepared him for burial. Lazarus, come out, Jesus said. He was in the tomb 4 days. At the end of Jesus, he came out. The passages involved with our look at Mary's anointing are Matthew 26, 6-13, Mark 14, 3-9, and John 12, 2-8. We're going to use Matthew as our baseline, but we're going to look and include the other two Gospels as well. Significantly absent here is the Gospel of Luke. Luke records some things about this family. He's probably the one who gives us these great details about Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus, some background. And part of it is he doesn't who they are at the time he's talking about them, or where a certain incident takes place. Luke is protective. as we'll see. So these three passages, people are all over the map with them. They're saying, well, the John 12 passage actually occurred back with Luke 7. Or that the John 12 passage actually occurs on Wednesday or Thursday of Passion Week. But I would ask you to read them carefully and see that there's some very precise core language that is shared by all three Gospels. And it's so precise that you look at it and you realize, no, this has to be the exact same incident. Now, Matthew and Mark don't mention the woman's name. John does. Luke doesn't mention the incident at all, and this is very puzzling considering that it is so significant to the others. So let's undertake an outline. And in this outline, we're going to go scene by scene. Actually, what I'm going to do for you, pump up the fonts a little bit as I go along, be able to actually along with me. So, all right. How's that? So we begin with the supper scene as I showed you on the map. Because there must be many people here, they had to use a larger home. And when Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, supper there, and Martha was serving, but Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. Large, 6 inches or a cushion, and reclining there. Simon the leper is able to accommodate Jesus, the disciples, his friends. But they are gathered here at this home. Next, we have the grand gesture of Mary then came to him having a litron. So a litron is a Roman pound. It's about 12 ounces. So think of a container the size of a Coke can, right? Or whatever your favorite beverage. Having alabaster flask of very costly, fragrant oil. And she broke, and as he sat at the table and anointed the feet of Jesus, that just is so much like Luke 7. She anoints Jesus' feet and wipes his feet with her hair. Just that which occurs a couple of years before in Luke chapter 7. And you kind of go, well, have they just gotten confused? Did Luke assembling his history not get the date right or the sequence right in his gospel? Luke was a wonderful, meticulous historian. I don't think he would. But besides, I believe that there is a reason for every detail. And that this Mary did precisely what the woman in Luke chapter 7 did for a very poignant reason, which we will study. But she makes this grand gesture. She uses that exact same fragrant kind of oil that was used, the same container that was used in the previous incident in Luke chapter 7. And it's a detail that can help catch our eye. Let's go back here. There is an insidious insinuation from a certain Judas. This Judas, the most trustworthy of all, when his disciples saw it, so think all 12 are watching this incident, Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples who was intending to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to poor people?" Now, he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as he had the money box, he used to pilfer what was put into it. Now, John, as he makes this revelation, you can almost hear the crowd suck in their breath. Because Judas is the one that everyone least. And don't you think he sounds holy here? Why wasn't this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to poor people? Doesn't it sound like he's concerned? And people who sound concerned for poor people are getting rich off their backs. That heads of charities are getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. Are on the take. And that they're exploiting poverty for the sake of personal gain. Here, Judas knows how to pluck the heartstrings. And he sounds so wonderful, dripping with compassion over the poor, as this is laid out. So he wasn't concerned about the poor. He was a fake. And he was stealing from the poor, even as he was stealing from the money box. So he makes this insinuation. Why was this not sold for 300 denarii? Now, this price, it's actually more than. Remember when the disciples said, well, it would cost a certain amount of money to buy enough bread for 500 people? Okay, this amount is 50% more than that. That's how much money this perfume is. Now, I suppose I could have gone online and discovered, the most expensive perfume in the world and see how much that was. What whale had to die for the perfume. But I had something happen today as I was researching. Facebook ad. So this Facebook ad popped up for a not really my thought. You have a ham, and it was and it's the most famous thing in the world. I'm totally a creature of appetite. You know me too well, or if you don't, now you do. And so, anyway, it was $102 per pound for this particular ham. And you know, to think about a little perfume, you know, enough perfume to buy bread for about 800 people. You think about that. My mind is boggled at such figures and markets and economic factors, but the comparison boggles the mind. And so you almost get it when Judas says this. Shouldn't we do that? This statement by Judas infects the disciples. He had that kind of power over them. I find this very interesting. He has such power that some were indignantly remarking to one another, why has this perfume been wasted? Now you get from Matthew and Mark, you get that the disciples are indignant. Only Judas. Judas, he makes this insidious insinuation. And the disciples become indignant, remarking to one another, why has this perfume been wasted? For this perfume might have been sold for over 300 denarii. They're repeating Judas' words right out of his mouth. That's the influence that Judas has to the poor. And they go further. They're scolding Mary. For the poor. They're scolding Mary. Unbelievable. Just absolutely unbelievable. So, Jesus corrects. Jesus was aware of it. When he was aware of it, he said to them, why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always. There's something remarkable here, I think. Understands how close Jesus is while to have forgotten. And even if Jesus didn't go into the whole thing about how he must go to Jerusalem and die at the hands of the Jewish leadership, it's there, isn't it? It's there. So he corrects his disciples. The poor will be with you always, but me you do not have always. He explains her gesture. In pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial. She poured it broke the vial, poured it on his head, and then used it on his feet and anointed his head and wiped it with her hair. So he explains the gesture. She did it for preparation for my burial. And again, he's telling us that she understands how close his death is. He's accurately her thinking, I'm going for his burial. Had she figured out the exact day. Who knows? We don't know if she knew it exactly, but she knew it was close. And I think it's so remarkable that she's got figured out what the disciples don't have a clue about. Not even to the last hour did they have a clue. And then when the last hour comes, it's shocking. Shocking. She did it for my burial. And then he memorializes her. Surely I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, notice the use of the word, this gospel news is preached. What good news is that? Why, it's the good news of his burial and the sweet fragrance of his death. Your head fills with questions, right? Why anoint someone before they're dead? Isn't that kind of rude? Hey, what are you doing? Don't anoint me just yet. I'm not dead yet. Don't do that. You're freaking me out. Why I don't anoint Jesus before he died? Sure, I think. Because his death is a sweet fragrance of sacrifice to God. Normally, you anoint after death. You clean the body thoroughly and anoint the body. Normally, you do that. But not this time. This was an extraordinary and unique death. And in all its seemingly ugliness, the ugliness of Christ's death, why not take the greatest perfume and make it a matter of fragrance? Stuck in the gospel account. This is related and repeated through the world and throughout. And again, this one Christ for his burial. Expensive perfume. Interesting. Christ at the Last Supper said, "Do this in remembrance of me." In essence, here he says, read this in remembrance of her. Look what it says, as a memorial to her. Remember this grand gesture. Remember this woman. So, tonight, we're going to remember this woman. Who I think she is. And you can see we're going to do it in 32-point font. Actually, we're about done with that. Just want to make sure you can see it. So we're going to look at Luke chapter 7, the forgiveness of a sinful woman. who breaks a jar of expensive perfume and wipes Jesus' feet with her hair and tears. And that this incident occurs at the house of a Pharisee by the name of Simon. We don't know which town. It's because he's a Pharisee, more likely in the area of Judah and environs of Jerusalem than it is in Galilee. I'm sure there were Pharisees up in Galilee, but not as common. So we're also going to look at Luke 10. Jesus visits Martha's house, but there the village is not identified. And in John 11, Jesus raises Lazarus, and this occurs in Bethany. It is where his sisters live. So, as you might guess, turn to Luke 7. Luke chapter 7. All right. We will begin 6. We're not going to linger, certainly going to note several. Where this is from Nain in Galilee. It's on the west side on a mountaintop. And that's the task we have early. Many of them. And now we're at some the Pharisees' house. One of the Pharisees that he might have said now. A woman who was in the city, and after reclining in the house of the Pharisee, after buying an alabaster jar of perfume, and behind at the side after crying, she began to wet his feet with the hair of her head, kept on drying off and kissing his feet and anointing with the perfume. An extraordinary scene. So here's the thing about feet. They get dirty easily. And they really didn't have covered footwear in the ancient world so much. They had sandals, as you've seen. And there's all kinds of dirty things out there in the street. We drove in Texas last week. And near where they fed the cattle, remember, they didn't have indoor plumbing. In fact, they really didn't have outdoor plumbing. They had chamber pots. And their idea of outdoor plumbing was to empty the chamber pot out the door. That was outdoor plumbing. Of hazards for pedestrians. Moreover, your feet, they breed bacteria like nobody's business. Those bacteria get going, man, they're going to stink. All those dead bacteria, after a while, wash them off. So you wash your feet. It's a very common thing that you would assign to your household slave. But this woman, she is no slave. She purchases an alabaster jar of perfume. This is probably worth what we would think of as hundreds of dollars or more in value. And she goes out and purchases it. Whatever that she was doing that was sinful, and it doesn't actually say it was lucrative. And so she takes that, she pours it out onto his feet. Pharisee, who what kind of woman this is, who touches him, that she, in other words, what an idiot. So, but Simon, oh, this woman is unnamed. Simon was to his house. Remember on Passion Week, we're at the house of Simon the leper. All right, Simon the leper. Can a leper have folks over for supper? Nope. So get this, this guy's last name is Leper. And he was known locally as Simon the leper. But if he can have people over to his house, he's not a leper anymore. Can we insert something into this narrative here by deduction? Simon. Okay. Now this guy over here in Luke 7, he's Simon the Pharisee. Can he have people in his house? You bet he can. Because he's got Jesus in his house. All right, so is he Simon the leper? Well, either he's Simon not yet the leper, or Simon the Pharisee, the former leper, or whatever it is. And Simon is, well, it's a common enough name. Okay, you got Simon Peter, Simon the other guy, Simon the leper, Simon the Pharisee. Common enough name, okay? And yet I think that Simon the leper of Bethany of Luke 7 is Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. And what to that deduction, for that's what it is the little details, especially of the method of washing his feet, what she used. It's unmistakable. Who would ever do that? And who would ever do it? Why? Simon, I have something to say to you. Notice that Jesus' first name is on an informal basis. You know what I like about American English? It doesn't have a formal form. All those other languages, you're trying to figure out vous voyons, tout voyons. You know, you're trying to figure it all out. Can't we just call each other you and be done with it? Well, okay. He's your terms with Simon the Pharisee. calls him by his first name. This means that he had a relationship with this Pharisee. So Simon says, "Teacher, speak." For a certain money lender, one who owed an denarii and the other 50. Not being able to pay him back, he gave grace to them both. Therefore, who of them loved him more? And after thinking it over, Simon said, "I take it that the one to whom he forgave more." And he said to him, "You judge rightly." And after turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, "See this woman? I entered into your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she wet my feet with tears and wiped them with her hair." You know what she did? Here's the woman's hair. We understand is one of the key factors in her beauty. This is a biblical principle. She does this horrible, dirty thing with her hair, expressing her humility with her beauty. You gave me no kiss, but she did not stop kissing my feet. You did not anoint me with oil, but she anointed my feet with perfume. For this thanks I say to you, her many sins have been forgiven. So she loved much, and to him who is forgiven little loves little. And he said to her, "Your sins have been forgiven." And those who were reclining at the table with him began to speak among themselves, "Who is this man who even forgives sins?" And he said to the woman, "Your works have saved you." No, he didn't. He said, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." By saved, he means forgive. Wonderful example of how her belief in Jesus' power to forgive gave her eternal life. So if we were just going to read this, we're just going to file this away. Luke does on Simon the Pharisee at a certain house. She undertakes these actions that are very interesting, very specific, very unique. It came about while they were traveling, and he himself entered into a certain village. Let's see which village. A certain woman by the name of Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who also sat right beside the feet of Jesus and was hearing his word. Now Martha was out concerning much service, and standing next to him, she said, "Lord, is it not that my sister has left me alone to serve? Therefore tell her that she should help me." She already knows, as many sisters do, that it doesn't do any good to tell her. That her sister doesn't pay attention to her bossiness. Imagine that. She figures if she can get the Lord of the universe in on this, she'll obey. It's just bring the Lord in, she has to obey him. And Jesus thought about it and said to her, "Martha, Martha, troubled concerning many things. Now there's one need, and Mary picked out the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." And at this moment, we're introduced to Mary and Martha, sisters. Martha had a real gift of hospitality, but at the moment, the better thing to pick out would have been to listen to Jesus at his feet. I think Martha could have recalled a prior incident from Jesus' life. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. But here we know these two now by name. We have no way of associating the sinful woman of Luke 7 with Mary and Martha of Luke chapter 10. There isn't a speck of evidence. Sinful woman with Mary, nothing there. We don't have that yet. But we do have a memorable moment. Now let's go to John 11, verse 17. These two sisters fascinate me. They're so different, and one, like many of us, one has a weak moment and then a strong one. One has a strong moment and then a weak one. So Jesus arrived. He found him 4 days already having been in the tomb. This is Lazarus. Remember, they sent Lazarus is sick. It's very grave. Better come. Because look, you got to heal him before he dies. Now let's think through our Gospel of Luke here. Has Jesus ever raised anyone from the dead? Yeah, right there in Luke 7, right? Right before the incident with the sinful woman, we have Jesus raising the widow's son at Nain. It doesn't matter when Jesus does this, but then we might ask, what's the greater work? To heal a sick man, a dead man. The greater work is to raise the dead man. Now this, Jesus declares his blood. So Jesus arrived, and he arrived in Bethany. Now at last, we have this town identified. It's near Jerusalem, about 15 stadia. So I think a stadia is about, if I have this right, 600 feet. And so it comes out to a couple miles. A little under 2 miles, 9,000 feet. Am I doing my math right? I'm terrified. I'm in public doing math. I wake up screaming sometimes from that dream. Well, he's in Bethany near Jerusalem, about 15 stadia. And from many Jews, had come to those around Martha, will give solace to them concerning their brother. So they have these professional mourners they bring in. And if you're the foghorn leghorn, you can make some bucks as a mourner. Okay, you have the loud, wailing, ululating voice. You got that ululation thing down? Oh boy, you can make some bucks. Okay, because they would gather together, these mourners, and the loudest and the best ululators would all ululate together, and you'd really mourn someone up good that way. And of course, what they're supposed to do is help the grieved feel a little better while this grieving. It's supposed to show companionship, but there were pros who did this. I mean, isn't that awful? People taking advantage of of those who've lost a loved one. I'm so grateful that never goes on in our country. Times. So Martha, now this is Martha. Remember, Martha was the one who was the serving one, and when she should have been listening. But Martha, since she'd heard that Jesus is coming, met him. Mary was sitting in the house. There's Mary back at the house. Same house where they met before. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you were here, my brother would not have died. Boy, that much baggage in that statement. You blew it, Lord. Isn't that a heavy baggage? If you were here, he wouldn't have died. See, now that he's died, it's the irrevocability of death. We can't get him back. Know that whatever you might ask God, God will give to you. So good expression of faith here. By Martha, remember, Martha is expressing truth. After all, while she was preparing food and serving. But even now, I know that whatever you might ask God, God will give it to you. And Jesus says, your brother will be raised again. And Martha says to him, I know that he will be raised again in the resurrection in the last day. But of course, that's not what Jesus means. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will certainly never die. By the way, there's this wonderful little bit of eschatology there. Down and read 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 18 with this alongside. It's beautiful the way the Greek language works in this. What it says is, if you die, you will be raised. If you're a believer who dies physical death, you'll be raised. But if you're a believer who is alive at what? If you're a believer or who is alive and believes, you'll never die. You'll never die a physical death. It means that the rapture generation bypasses physical death. And he stated very succinctly this rapture eschatology that we hold dear and for good reason. This. She says to him, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who comes into the world. Now she's showing her eschatology a little bit, the one who comes into the world. And after she said these things, she departed and secretly called her sister Mary, saying, the has come and is calling you. And when he rose quickly and came to him. And Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was in the place where Martha met him. So the Jews who were with her in the house and comforting her, after seeing Mary quickly rise and leave, followed her, saying, she's going to the tomb to weep there. So you get these professional mourners. So there they are at the house. There's ululation. If you don't know what ululation is, I suggest you look it up on YouTube and listen to all the great ululators in the world. I suggest, however, keeping the volume down. All right, let's just keep it down. Ululation is best kept low. So Mary, this was, after seeing him, fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you were here, my brother would not have died. So Jesus, since he saw her crying, and the Jews gathered with her, crying, he groaned in spirit and was himself troubled, and he said, where have you laid him? And they said, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. And the Jews were saying, see how he loved him. But some of them said, wasn't he able, the one who opened the eyes of the blind, to act also, lest this man die? And therefore Jesus, groaning again within himself, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. And he says, take away the stone. And the sister of the one who died, Martha, says to him, Lord, I'm a stench for the fourth day. And it's no doubt they had prepared his body. By law, this had to be done, or by law and tradition, this had to be done within a day. And so they would wash the body thoroughly and wrap it with spices and perfume to keep down the stench of the decay that is inevitable with a dead body. There is by this time day. So Jesus says to her, "Did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" And there the stone from where the one who died was lying. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you heard me. And I know that you will always hear me. But because of the surrounding crowd, I spoke, that they might believe that you sent me." After saying these things, he shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out. Lazarus, come out." The one who had died came out, having been bound foot and hand in grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus says to them, "Release him and let him go." So if you would like to go back to Matthew 26, verse 6. When Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, there, now from John. And Martha was serving, but Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. Mary then came to him, having a litron, flask of very costly fragrant oil. And she broke the vial and poured it on his head as he sat at the table, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But when his disciples saw it, Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, who was intending to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to poor people?" Now he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box. And as he had the money box, he used to pilfer what was put into it. Then some were indignantly remarking to one another, "Why has this perfume been wasted? For this perfume might have been sold for over 300 denarii, and the money given to the poor." And they were scolding her. This from Mark. And then we finish with Matthew. When Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she's done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but with me you do not have always. Fragrant oil on my body. She did it for my burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will be told as a memorial to her." So I think next Wednesday what we'll do is as a memorial. I think it was Mary. Her sins had been forgiven. She owed Christ much and loved much. He's going to die soon. That event, which will save my sins, is about to occur. It's the most beautiful event, the most wonderful event. The Song of Solomon does an interesting thing. It declares that perfume ought to be an expression of love, not a magnet for love. Pretty shrewd, eh? This perfume is an expression of love because she knows that his love will forgive her and that by his death, she will at last receive the promised release from her sins. What a scene. Lazarus the risen, Simon the healed, Mary the forgiven. What a scene we have here. Let's close in a word of prayer. Oh Lord, only you can construct such a vignette. Only you could do that. As we consider it, we ask that we too would recall that it was your Son's glorious death which cleansed us of our sins and set us free from death. In his name we pray. Amen. Sure. I must be. There are no microphones in heaven. No need. Okay, well, it should be coming here. Jeremiah 23:4. Clue me in. What's it say?
That providing people to the Jews when they come back to the promised land.
Yeah, maybe.
Shepherds for them.
Oh, well, that's interesting. People are always wanting prophecy.
I will also raise up shepherds over them. And they will tend to them and they will not be afraid any longer. Is that the second, after the second coming? Is that like when they come back to the land in the millennium?
Well, here's a regathering of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So right now they have shepherds who destroy them. That's the Jewish leadership at Jeremiah's time.
Mm-hmm.
So they go off into exile. So these shepherds here are the Babylonians and Persian, eventually the Persians, Medes and Persians. So that's who these shepherds are. And then he's going to gather them out of all these countries and bring them back where they're going to be fruitful and multiply.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then he said, well, maybe this is in verse 4. I think these shepherds here are probably the Ezras and Nehemiahs and so on.
Ah.
Okay.
Okay.
It will not be because these are good shepherds, and you know they're the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
And see, then after that, you get Messiah comes. So this is a regathering post exile.
Okay.